It's a bit of a cliche to reference George Orwell, but sometimes it's sort of essential. And the reason it's a cliche is because he's just so damn good. And here he is from 1984, his most important and best known work. Every statue and street building has been renamed, every date has been altered, and the process is continuing, day by day and minute by minute. History has stopped. Nothing exists except an endless present in which the party is always right. Now, it's a matter of great regret that right now, an awful lot of people seem to be regarding 1984 as not some dire warning of a future dystopia, but as a handbook for the here and now. I'm talking about the issue of public statues and the people who are determined to destroy these. There are an awful lot of people in the world I have absolutely no time for at all. But the people I have the least amount of time for are those who want to whitewash history and destroy public art. Now, let me make two things very apparent to the people determined to do this. The first is that every single nation, every single civilization there has ever been, was founded on slavery. And the second is that the single most ahistorical thing you can ever do is to impose the standards of the day onto the past. Historical figures did not hold 21st century values. This does not mean they should be extinguished from the public realm. And what sort of people have done this before? What sort of individuals are these current activists emulating? Well, there were the Puritans of the 17th century, the Jacobins of the French Revolution. In the 20th century, it was the Stalinists, the Maoists, the Nazis, the Khmer Rouge. And in more recent vintage, it was ISIS. These might not be the sort of people you want to be emulating. And we also have to consider the fact that in the 17th and 18th centuries, the period in which these people are targeting, the entire economy was wrapped up in the slave trade. If you were involved in business at any level at all, through shipping, cotton, sugar, coffee, and all their attendant industries, then you had dipped a toe into the slave trade. It was almost impossible to avoid. So the current activists are really punishing people simply for being alive in that period of history. But we also have to consider that, well, if we're attacking slave owners, where does this start and where does this stop? Muhammad was a slave owner. Are we going to start to demolish every mosque in the land? Are we going to look to Rome to pull down all the statues of Caesar and Augustus? Should America destroy all the monuments they have to Washington and Jefferson? And should we remove anything that reminds us of slavery, or indeed is a product of slavery? Because if so, the Parthenon needs to go. And the Colosseum does too. The arguments to take these statues down then are completely inconsistent, and they're forwarded by people who are largely historically illiterate. Such positions we should be able to dismiss pretty handily. Now, some have made comparisons between what's going on now and the tearing down of statues in post-communist states, or in Iraq. Let's make a comparison there, shall we? On one hand, you've got people tearing down monuments in the heat of a revolution. And on the other hand, you've got people living in entirely stable, prosperous societies deciding to get incredibly furious about things that happened 300 years ago. There is absolutely no correlation to be drawn between these motivations at all. So those arguments can also be dismissed. Now, I know what some of you out there are thinking. You're thinking, what does this guy know? He's clearly a white, straight man and is thus a privileged, racist oppressor. So we can dismiss what he's saying too. Now, I shouldn't even need to respond to an argument as puerile and idiotic as that, but I'm going to anyway. Because you shouldn't be misled by my accent. I am first generation Irish, who had a very patriotic upbringing. So I could, if I wanted, start to get really irate about statues of Oliver Cromwell, or Edward Carson, or Charles Trevelyan, and be demanding that these were torn down. And if I did, I would actually have a lot more of a valid position than the people who are arguing for statues of slavers to be brought down when they're white middle-class people living in Bristol. But I'm not arguing for those to be brought down, and I disagree strongly with anyone who did make that case. Now, all of this quite naturally brings us on to Sadiq Khan. Sadiq Khan is Mayor of London, and London is a mesmerising, magical, brilliant place. But at the minute, it is kind of stuffed to the brim with self-righteous woke idiots. And Sadiq Khan is their totemic chief. He's also a Muslim. And there's nothing wrong with that before you start getting annoyed. But Khan has thrown himself fully behind this campaign. And what that means is, a man who spent his entire life worshipping a slave trader is now agitating to rip down monuments which depict slave traders. If you can express the idiocy and hypocrisy behind that position, please put your answers on a postcard and send them to Sadiq Khan. Thanks. London is twice as old as Cairo or Baghdad. It is a treasure trove of history. So this jewel cannot be left in the hands of the sort of narcissistic, petulant, demented cultural vandals as Khan and his followers. It must be protected. And that means it's up to us. Because if this is allowed to go on, then this mania is just going to spread. It will move from slavery to these radicals' idea of imperialism and militarism. And that means the statues of Churchill, Wellington and Nelson will be next. In fact, they've already started to be vandalised. And when I say they're going to be next, in fact, that's been preceded. Because the demolishers have turned their attention to the Scouts first instead. The reason they've done this is because apparently Robert Baden-Powell was homophobic. I mean, that's crazy. You'd almost think he lived in a period where homosexuality was a criminal offence or something. This case, I think, illustrates the emptiness of much of the contemporary left. If they have to go back 300 years to find something to get furious about, then they really don't have much of an argument. And we also need to be very clear about the fact that we're talking about quite a small minority here. A radical, bullying, vocal minority who are determined to impose their views on the rest of the nation, to be sure, but a minority all the same. And this minority also seem to have little regard for this great nation. And those of us who love this country need to stand up and draw a line in the sand. Because if emboldened, this pattern of destruction is just going to spread. And these people do not have the right to arbitrarily impose their narcissistic bullying on the rest of us. And I'd like, as a reminder of that, to close on the wisdom of the great Edmund Burke. Because half a dozen grasshoppers under a fern make the field ring with their importunate chink, whilst thousands of great cattle, reposed beneath the shadow of the British oak, chew the cud and are silent. Pray, do not imagine that those who make the noise are the only inhabitants of the field.